Hi. What I have to tell you is that I haven't worked on this subject before, so this is my first time, and I started from a reflection on how you avoid surveillance. and The problem was that I was looking on how to avoid surveillance in individual surveillance files. So the only things that I could find was how you fail to avoid surveillance while trying to avoid surveillance. Um, so if they are successful, most of them are not there in the surveillance file. Um, and I looked at self-censorship and self-punishment, um, and the question that I had in the back of my mind is whether self-censorship is actually dissent. Is it a victory of the individual, that he's keeping something of himself to himself, or is it a victory of the regime? For what does it matter what you think if you don't talk about it? In this attempt, the secret police needs to know, needs to have information. So keeping the information actually can be seen as an act of opposition to the regime, an act of dissidence, if you want. So these were the things that I started with when I worked on my case study. And there were two articles that, a book and an article, that were influential. The article is written by Cook and Heilman in 2012, and it's about the Danish cartoon problem. When they separate between a public self-censorship and private self-censorship. So public self-censorship is what I'm talking about, because a public self-censorship, as they define it, needs an external factor. So it needs someone to push you into self-censoring yourself. The second important theoretical question came from a book by Neymar, and talked about the secret police self-censoring themselves. So this is not a one-way process, is a two-way process. So kind of these questions guided me throughout the case studies that I'm going to offer you today. In the early 1970s, the Romanian secret police conducted an operation that was meant to canvass the entire country to uncover the last remnants of fascists and fascist sympathizers. This operation was titled Operation Epilogue. Denazification, conducted in the 1950s, followed up by massive arrests of many fascist followers, was concluded into lengthy imprisonment for these guys. In prison, most of the political prisoners, which included members of far-right fascist parties, were part of a program to create a new man capable to fit within the new communist realities of the country. In 1964, with the general amnesty for political prisoners, the survivors of these imprisonment campaigns were freed, and a slow reintegration of the prisoners began. A few years later, the secret police wanted to make sure that any competing ideology or political framework was dismantled and that the fascist sympathizers were no longer active. What Operation Epilogue did was to reactivate the networks of informers interested in a sociological overview of networks of former political prisoners and their support system at their release from prison. What were these people doing? Who helped them and why? How were they behaving? And what was their stance towards the regime? Since a large part of these fascist networks related to the Romanian Orthodox Church, Most of this operation was conducted amidst clerical groups within the upper echelons of the church. The article follows the interaction between the secret police, the administration of the Department for Religious Denominations, and groups within the Romanian Orthodox Church within the framework of Operation Epilogue to discover the network of fascist and fascist sympathizers that were recuperated by the Orthodox Church. However, the focus of this article is not a discussion of the secret police actions during Operation Epilogue, but the reaction of the surveilled individuals and groups in order to protect themselves from the secret police. In this vast array of responses, I am focusing on two in particular: self-censorship and self-punishment. Self-censorship is a personal response and a choice taken by individuals that was rarely preserved in the archives as individual acts. They appear in memoirs, biographies, post-factum interviews. Self-censorship was visible for the secret police when it became a trend. It is a private act that one often finds out about when the person makes a conscious effort to reveal it. This gesture implies trust. For instance, revealing self-censorship could be a pedagogical action, teaching your child in the communist period what not to talk about your family life outside the house is in a sense a way of revealing self-censorship. There are examples in the archives of children that were told by parents what to speak of and what not to speak of regarding their family life. Another moment when we become aware of self-censorship is when the external stimulant that introduces self-censorship comes to an end. Self-censorship comes hand in hand with the routinization and generalization of surveillance. To quote Gheorghe, with the role envisaged for citizens whose duty became to watch, listen, and inform the authorities. As this participation became more systematized and became an integral part of routine policing, panopticism was established, the all-seeing society in which no one ever felt beyond surveillance. The sole way in which one might envisage an escape from the effect of surveillance is to self-censor. In the distinction offered by Cook and Heilman, I talk here about a public type of self-censorship that needs an external stimuli to exist. The reasons one does censor him or herself are best summarized by Stroinska and Cecchetto. As soon as a person externalizes one thought and ideas in written, oral, or visual form, that person immediately becomes, I'm quoting here, immediately becomes visible to those in power and can become accountable to these more or less formalized rules. The result may be that these thoughts and behaviors can be targeted for modification or punishment by authorities. For this reason, a resistance developed in many individuals to disclosure, and there is a conscious effort to keep sensitive things hidden in their works. Some individuals may choose to self-censor out of fear of being punished by external forces, or if they say or do something that goes against what is deemed the public good. Others may choose to self-censor because they consider some topic off limits as being either damaging to their own identity, offensive, or damaging to others, or simply inappropriate for the time, place, or audience. In autobiographical writing, where traumatic situations are recounted, an author may choose to silence or modify in some way the facts associated with a memory that may be inconvenient, painful, shameful, or dangerous. What did one censor when one self-censored? That is related with another type of routinization, a routinization of the rules and regulation imposed by the regime. One needed to know the rules, the do's and don'ts, or what is acceptable, what one can negotiate and get away with, and what cannot, and is comprised within the hard limits. That is the reason I have linked self-censorship with self-policing. They both stem out of routinization of rules. However, while self-censorship is a personal private act, self-policing was an institutional one in my case study. Investigating the intersections between the state and the Orthodox Church during the communist regime, one notices periods of relaxation of requirements when punishment was delayed or even absent for behavior that in the early stages of the regime could have required swift action from the part of the state. Among many reasons for reaching this status quo between the state and functional religious community was the willingness of the institution of the church to sanction the moment in which members of the community, clergy and or believers went outside the legal framework and the regulations imposed on religious life by the state. This was seen by many at the time as a collaboration of the church hierarchy with the state, but it also served the institution of the church in its constant negotiation it had with the state to expand the boundaries imposed by the regime by remaining within the requirements of the state. Self-policing was often preferred by the secret police and by the Department for Religious Denominations, who favored local solutions to local problems that would not involve the center. In some respects, one can look at this action of the representatives of the state as in itself an act of self-censoring. And I'm going now to the case study. I'm quoting in the subtitle here, the Archbishop Mladin. You tell me who is a fascist and I'll make sure I'll never meet him. In the early 1970s, when the secret police started investigating the networks of fascists still existing within the Romanian Orthodox Church, one of the first actions it took was to reactivate the network of informers inside the church. The type of questions, the results they were after, the frequency with which they met informers resulted into a sort of an open secret. So it's no longer a secret campaign because everybody is picked up from the street and they start asking the same questions and they kind of figure out what they are after. This allowed a response from the church, whether conscient or instinctive, to protect itself from the actions of the secret police. The response took two forms: self-policing, so actively removing from within the rank and file the former members and sympathizers of the Iron Guard and Brotherhood of the Cross, the fascist parties, the fascist factions in Romania in the interwar, and self-censorship. Both these actions were dissuaded by the secret police, who found itself in a paradoxical situation since they were searching for information, and both these actions from the church were preventing information. The case study I'm analyzing is based on a 12-volume individual surveillance file that the secret police had on Archbishop Nicolae Mladin, the Orthodox Metropolitan of Transylvania in Sibiu, that was reactivated as an informer in the 1970s within Operation Epilogue. So this guy was an informant and he was reactivated in the 1950s. This was a case of a surveilled informant. As I discussed in the introduction, self-censorship was a private act that was rarely exposed in the files. However, in this case, an entire discussion of the officers around the information that they were receiving from Archbishop Mladin, his informant name is Ardeleanu Ion, brings into focus the problem the officer were faced with when dealing with self-censorship. They wanted the former fascists to be integrated within the church and lured into a sense of safety so the secret police could follow what they did with their ideological formation, if they proselytized their ideology and who they attracted to it. They needed Archbishop Mladin to work with them in verifying the former political prisoners' activity. Before they even approached the Archbishop, he requested a meeting with the local inspector for religious denomination and asked for a list of names of former fascists so he would not hire one of them by mistake within his archbishopric. He knew they were coming and he prevented this by asking this list so he knows who's a fascist and who's not a fascist. He was quoting to have said in the meeting, "You tell me who is a fascist and I'll make sure I'll never meet him." Upon receiving a provisional list from the inspector, he made sure he was never available to the priests that were released from prison and were part of the list when they asked for audiences. Mladin biographical context that the Securitate was aware of, however, describes him as a former sympathizer of the Romanian fascists himself. So he is aware who's a fascist, doesn't need a list of names, well immersed into the intellectual and clerical fascist circles of Sibiu and the surrounding counties. He needed no list to know who was or was not a former fascist. Informants around him offer several notes where he was quoting of saying, "I am not meeting this priest. Don't you know that the Securitate is out to get anyone who deals with the legionnaires?" In another instance, he refused an audience with a former political prisoner, now a priest in his jurisdiction, saying he should stay in the countryside and be happy he has a church to go to. I never should have accepted to hire him back. One informant describes the archbishop as afraid to make one professor rector of the theological institute because he was a legionnaire. The informant boycotted the efforts of the secret police to place him in situations that would result in him obtaining information that were important for the secret police. He eliminated his former fellows, censored his language, his private agenda, his ideological insights into the activity of the fascist sympathizers in his archbishopric. He censored his reading material, eliminating from within his library any writings that could have been seen as anti-communist or fascist. A look at the document describing the actions of the secret police officers in Mladin's archbishopric revealed that most of the steps of the archbishop took were very closely connected with what the officers were there to investigate. If under the cover of his position he has a fascist activity, and if he supports the legionary elements in his archbishopric. The second thing that they need to find out, if the headquarters of the bishopric and its annexes, there are hidden fascist materials or anti-communist materials, and if these places are used as meeting grounds for legionnaires. The natures of the connection Ardeleanu Ion has with visitors from abroad. The only information Mladin offered the officers were related with the visitors of the Archdiocese See in Sibiu. The secret police noted that Mladin appears not to pass on any information regarding the activity of the former fascists to the foreign visitors he met with. A step ahead of the secret police investigation, the Archbishop became so paranoid about the secret police surveillance of his activity that he isolated himself in his apartment and refused to meet with anyone other than the cook and the nun that cleaned his quarters. His paranoia was justified if we look at the files, since many of the people, if not everyone who came in contact with him, wrote informant notes on his activity and their meeting. Finally, the secret police used other informants to surveil the situation of the former political prisoners and fascist sympathizers in the area. No action other than what the Archbishop, and other than the actions that Archbishop took, refusing to hire, promote, listen to grievances of the political prisoners within his church members, was taken by the secret police. So the secret police never took any actions against these fascist sympathizers that were out of prison. In time, and this is, I think this is the biggest impact that the Archbishop has, in time, he manages, after the secret police leaves and is no longer interested in the subject, he manages to bring into position these guys he never spoke with before. So when the situation calmed down, the bishop goes on and reversed his position and helped several of them into better work environments. This does not escape the secret police, since it's noted in the file. We know from the file, so obviously the secret police knows that he's doing that. but they take no action against it because it's no longer, I mean, the situation was diffused by the time the Archbishop brought them inside the bishopric again and gave them jobs. I have some conclusions, but they need to be worked. They need to be worked on. So this is basically my presentation.
Thank you, Anca. Thanks. Muriel, are you sharing? Are you muted?
No, I'm not muted. I think so. I think not. Am I sharing, or do you mean I should ask a question?
Oh, you should invite people to ask a question.
Because I have questions myself. Okay, I will ask first someone else so that I will not manipulate the mic. Does anybody have any question?
One question. Hi, thanks for the presentation. My question is regarding the present day situation, whether those kind of self-censored...
Make sure not to touch your microphone because you're moving a lot. Something is moving and you
okay, can you
yeah.
hear me now?
Don't move, just don't move. Don't move your paper.
Still. Okay, my question is related towards the possible nowadays rehabilitation of those self-censored persons. Did you research something about that, and you know, the impact it has on a post-89 situation or present day situation? Thanks.
Well, what I've read in the literature that we have in Romania so far on self-censorship deals a lot with literature, novels, poems that authors censored themselves are now published in their full. So in that case, they are actively doing. In this case, people tend not to believe when someone says that actually I self-censored, and I never gave them this or that. It's very difficult to control what they did in the communist regime now, and you don't have something to base yourself on other than his or her word that they've opposed the regime by self-censoring or by self-policing is easier to uncover because at that time the members of the clergy and the people that were punished by the institution shouted against the institution and said, you are doing the devil's work, you are collaborating with the regime, disregarding the end result or what the hierarchy wanted by self-policing. So that was actually an act of protection that they have done. Again, it's not very many people are taking this into account. So people still work on this. They've collaborated with the regime and they've punished their own church members and clergy. And this is how they collaborated with the regime. And they very rarely ask themselves, was it a reason? And when the church is giving the reason, they tend not to believe it.
Thank you. Any other question?
I have a straightforward question, I think. So this the operation epilogue, you mentioned that it's it involved a reactivation of those informers that were already implanted within the church in order to inform, and so this is a question really about the file and what kind of information you had to go on. because what I find most frustrating sometimes is not having access to, not finding in the archive the work plan, which lays out exactly what steps the officer and his or her informers should be taking. And I just wonder, in this case, do you have that work plan for that operation for the officers? And so from that, you're able to, you know, at least be able to kind of trace the steps that the officer should have, you know, informed the informer that you need to like deconspire, or you need to uncover this kind of these acts of self-censorship. I mean, how in the work plan, does it give you any clue as to how the operation unfolded in actual fact?
Okay, so this is why a top-down research is necessary. Thomas, thank you for the question. It's bottom-up, it doesn't help you very much because it's just informant files, and you usually don't know what the hell are they looking for, what is the reasoning behind it, but the secret police published a journal that was secret, their own journal. It was called Securitate. And in 1973, their first article in the journal was all about operational epilogue, which was undergoing at that time. So they talk about if it's successful, if it's not, why they are surveilling these guys, what do they want. If the name is in itself shows something of the secret police, so they know this is the end for the fascists. Yes, it's Operation Epilogue. It's the last remnants of the fascists in Romanian society. So we need to know if they are surviving or not, if ideology survives or not, if they. So all these questions that they have before Operation Epilogue, in 73, they are capable of offering answers. That's one way in which I could trace Operation Epilogue. The second way was I had a chance to see that this was one file of 12 volume. It was an extensive file, but I had a chance to see files from other people, from other surveys, exactly on this topic of the Operation Epilogue. So I pieced together 3 or 4 surveilled individuals or surveilled groups to see if the questions are the same, if they are asking the church different questions that, for instance, they are asking other communities, or for instance, cultural groups, actors, or writers, or whatever, because they are all involved. This is not just for the Orthodox Church. So piecing them together kind of gave me the questions that they were asking and the reasons that they are taking this Operation Epilogue. Plus, because the Archbishop is reticent to tell them things, and they know, the Archbishop knows, because this is why he was an informant in the first place. So he knows these guys, so they want information from him, but he's reticent. They have to bypass that. So within his file, they start thinking about how to bypass the lack of information in the Archbishop's case, and they start reactivating other informants on the informant, and it blows out of proportion for basically nothing, because nothing happens. I think if they would have gone to the bishop and told him, we don't want to punish them, we just want to know where they are and who they are, they would have had a chance to know more than. But when they never revealed what they want to do with the information, so the bishop stopped giving information at all. So these are the angles that I used to bypass actual missing information on the operation itself, because we don't have all the files in the secret police. The files on the thinking of the secret police are not there.
Oh.
The files of the officers are not there. We only have the files of the surveilled individuals.
Yeah, which is almost always the case.
Yeah.
James, you wanted to, because otherwise I have a question.
No, please. Thank you. That's just you kind of pointed to an issue that I also face.
And me.
Every now and then you by chance come across the inclusion of a work plan within a network file or a individual file or a penal file, but it's not routinely there. So you do end up having to reconstruct instructions somehow, how the instruction would have been given to the informer, what to focus on. So thanks, Anca.
Yeah, what I also miss very much in the archives is very often the description of how the people were enrolled as informants is missing. Yeah, so the people they informed upon is there, but not how they became informants and why, and so that's a pity.
No, that's present in the archives in Romania.
That's
so
there.
That's there.
That's
Oh,
there.
right. That's fantastic.
You have to
in the Czech archives, it was very well curated. It was all taken out because it's taking needless space, and they took very good care. They curated the archives very well. So they, after 10 years, they would get rid of this piece of information because they didn't consider it relevant, and it was taking space. So they were freeing space. Actually, yeah. So my question is, first of all, I love your paper. I think it's fantastic. I love that you said self-censorship is linked to self-policing. This is so true, so obvious, and yet I've never read it put in such a blunt way. I think you're so right. I love that. And also that self-censorship is rarely visible in the files. And of course, that's the basics, the ABC of reading police files. So that's great. And I also love what James was already talking about, this secret versus open secrets dialectics. And I wanted to tell you, I don't know if you probably don't know yet, which is why I wanted to tell you about that. You wonderfully exposed this performative aspect of this priest who pretends he's not going to speak to fascists, and then, but he was a fascist himself, so he knows very well who they are, which is like hilarious. And it's all a theater play, because he knows he's surveilled, he's playing the game, he knows it's not true, the secret police knows it, it's not true. It's like it's all a theater play. And recently there was a new film about Havel that came out and made by a Czech filmmaker that I very much liked, even though of course it's criticized by the old timers who knew Havel personally, because of course they don't agree, because of course they have to show they know better because they knew him personally, right? But what I think is very well described in the film is precisely how, the film would show a scene of real life in Havel's life, and then all of a sudden the camera moves back, and it turns out this was a theater play, because he transformed his life into theater plays. Exactly as I spoke about Staniak and Vaniak, this play Protest. And of course, these are scenes of real life that happened to him. And exactly at that moment, actually, when they were showing that particular play, or they were showing this as being a dialogue in Havel's life, and then the camera moves back and you realize it was a theater play. I think this is wonderfully restituting exactly this theatrical aspect. So yeah, I can only recommend this film. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks. Open Secrets for me was fascinating. This is not the first paper I use Open Secrets, because we do tend to think that this was all hush hush and nobody knew about it. But even by the length of time in the 1970s, you're kind of familiar with what an inspector for religious denomination or a secret police officer might want from you if you meet him, or if he's asking you to inform on someone. So you sort of know it's not the secret that that classical secret that this activity of the secret police should be based on. So yeah, I love how he plays with them, but I think there's an element of insanity in the action of the archbishop, he later, I mean, my father was a student in 75 there in Sibiu, and in the Institute of Theology in Sibiu, and he told me that everybody thought that the bishop went crazy, that suddenly the bishop went crazy and locked himself into his apartment, and he's not receiving anyone. And I think there's an element of psychological problems and there, but still, there was his only way to escape it, and that's.
Yeah, but I think it's a very dangerous game to play, right? And where Havel, I think, won the game in the end is because he's a playwright by profession. So he was like playing the game of the secret police, but playing the game better because it's actually his whole life, his whole profession. So eventually he came out on top. But of course, I think it's a very dangerous mental game to play with anyone. So yeah, nothing. Yes, anyone else? No one else? Shall we move?
No, Igi, I think Igi has a question. Do you want to put your microphone on, Igi?
Yeah.
Oh.
Hello.
Hello, Igi.
Now I'm here.
Yeah.
And sorry for my late. And Anca, I'm sorry, I lost the first part of the presentation. And but the self-censorship, it's so intriguing and multi-layered questions. So my question was to use for investigators all these questions, the informative files or something materials, other materials also. Because I tried also catch this kind of episodes of self-censorship, but it's go through and the finding of this kind of cases in the interrogation files it's so difficult. So I'll try in my work. I try to compare and when there is a correspondence, then I compare the different materials. But yes, my question was that it's on which base do you, in which material do you use?
So I lucked out. It just happened that I found a file in which they described the fact that this guy is, they know he knows, and he's not, he acts like he doesn't know, and he's protecting himself in this way. So, and we know by reading his biography, by reading Mladin's biography, that it's impossible that he doesn't have this information and he's an informant, but he keeps these to himself, whether to protect his friends, his fellow fascist friends from the interwar period, or whether to protect himself because he doesn't know what the secret police might in the end do with the information he's giving. So it's by chance that I found it in, and it's not really his action, but what the secret police is doing with it. So they say he's not talking about this because se autocenzurează. That's what they keep telling in the file, that he's self-censored. So they are aware that this guy knows the information and not
like this endless column of mirrors, where everything keeps reflecting until it disappears.
But there are cases when you can guess there's something like this happening. So I have underground communities in the Greek Catholics here that are either using code or not speaking about something, but not speaking about that something actually speaks about that. Just by hiding that element speaks more about that element than by bringing it into the conversation, because they know they have tap phones. So they know there's microphone in their houses, so they know they shouldn't talk about it. They still have to talk about it. So they either use code or they do not talk about that in such a way that they actually talk about it. I will bring more examples into the final paper to target the self-censorship from many other aspects, because as I said, it's a very private act that you.
Okay, did you say that the secret police actually use the word self-censor?
Yes, se autocenzurează. This is why they have to come back to the central and tell them that we can't find anything, and in the center they are asked why, and they say this guy is self-censoring himself, and then they have to get a different way into the problem, bypassing the archbishop. So they are bringing in other informants from other sides, from other priests, other members of the archbishopric, to be able to bypass the fact that this guy is not talking about something that they know. Again, this is an informant, so they have him. He traveled to India, he traveled to America, he did the work of the secret police outside Romania for years before he became an archbishop. So they have him from a long time. They have him because he was a member of the fascist group in Sibiu. So this was used to blackmail him to collaborate, but to become an informant. So obviously, if they read his file, they know that he knows about these people. So the word that they use is that he's se autocenzurează. He's self-censoring himself.
Incredible.
A comment, I may.
Tatiana?
Yeah, thanks, Anca. I think that what you're talking about, that type of self-censorship that you're talking about, is very related to the question of informing and the culture of informing. And I found pretty interesting materials in the KGB archives about, yes, that the officers were aware of the level of sincerity of informers, and they have even their own classification of informers, those who probably would, using Securitate terminology, self-censor themselves, or would deliver partial information as a way of kind of the way of avoiding surveillance. The way of self-censorship is delivering partial information or sometimes misinformed things. So kind of there's more levels and varieties of informing that implies that what you're talking about. And of course, yes, I can just say that using my material, like the KGB officers were pretty much aware of this type of strategy as a kind of being an actor active in this way of protecting themselves or self-policing or protecting others. So in this case, in your materials, very much needed also elaborating this culture of informing, because that goes one with another.
Thanks. Yeah, it has to be there. And I think for these guys, it was an element of surprise. They were so sure that this guy would tell them everything, that they didn't need to put in work, and that they were shocked that they couldn't access the information the easiest way. So I think that's why they are so brutally describing this as self-censorship.